Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in this video we're going to be talking about a discovery related to this planet that you see on the screen that might actually be not good news for planets orbiting around the so-called M-type stars. We'll talk about how this planet right here seems to have like absolute no atmosphere whatsoever. Let's talk about this and welcome to What the Math. So the object known as LHS 3844b, which is what you see right here on the screen, this is something that's available in Space Engine for you to explore, is a planet or exoplanet we discovered only a few months ago by using the really famous now TESS telescope. Basically, by looking at this planet pass in front of its star, we saw that, well, there was something happening, and this something was of course an exoplanet. And although it was a very exciting discovery at first, we soon realized that this planet orbits its star surprisingly close. A single orbit here takes about 11 hours, meaning that the surface of this object is probably really toasty. But this star that it orbits is the most common type of a star in the galaxy, known as M-type dwarf, also known as a red dwarf. These red dwarfs are normally only, in terms of size, about the same size as Jupiter, as you can see, but in terms of mass, obviously a lot more massive. And one of the more exciting discoveries related to M-type stars was this right here, TRAPPIST-1, the system we discovered only a couple of years ago, where there are 7 Earth-sized planets orbiting around the system, and some of them also seem to be in the so-called habitable zone, where we could potentially have liquid water. But this paper from Nature magazine that was released only a few days ago from when I'm making this video talks about a study, a very thorough study of one of such planets around a similar M-type dwarf, and discovers a complete absence of any atmosphere. Now this study is brilliant in many different ways, but I wanted to start with the how. How did they actually find out all of this? Well, it's actually pretty clever. So luckily for us, when this planet orbits its star, we can quite easily and quite quickly see the changes in brightness around the star. Basically the dips and sudden increases in brightness. This is how we were able to see it to begin with. But Laura Kreidberg, the main researcher behind this paper, also created this beautiful animation that shows you exactly what they were able to see. So here, as the planet orbits every 11 hours, you'll notice that at some point, as it comes in front of us, suddenly the brightness here dips. That's when it passes in front of a star. Then, when it's on the other side of the star system, the brightness once again dips. But what's happening here? Well, what we're actually observing are the reflections of the starlight coming from the planet. So you'll notice that the orange part here increases the brightness, and then suddenly this brightness disappears as the planet goes behind the star. And here the brightness starts decreasing, then dips one more time, and starts increasing again. So they were able to see all of this with quite a lot of accuracy by looking at this planet for 100 hours and observing about 10 or so passages of the planet around the star. So by looking at all of these points, they realized that it was quite possible to use these differences here to try to see what kind of an atmosphere this planet might have by looking at the differences in temperature between the dark side of the planet and the bright side of the planet. And let's use this object here, TRAPPIST-1c, as a kind of an example. So because these objects are all tidally locked, and this is true for pretty much all of the planets orbiting around M-type dwarfs, one side will always be super hot, the other side will be super cold. But depending on the atmosphere, like for example if there's a thick atmosphere, some of this temperature might get exchanged, because obviously the atmosphere will move around the planet as well and will regulate all of the conditions, making it more or less similar if the atmosphere is very thick, or making it very different if the atmosphere is very thin. In our solar system we have two examples of this. One is Venus, that has a very slow rotation, but despite one side always facing away from the sun for like basically months at a time, this side is still ridiculously hot. The entire surface of Venus is more or less the same in temperature because the atmosphere is thick enough to literally transfer heat across the entire planet. On the other hand, Mercury that basically has practically no atmosphere whatsoever, here one side, the one that's closest to the sun, will always be pretty toasty, pretty hot, whereas the dark side will be super cold, and this changes almost instantly because there's no atmosphere to maintain this heat and to transfer it across the planet. And so the darker side of Mercury is always significantly much colder than the bright side. As a matter of fact, some parts of Mercury never get any sunlight, specifically some of the craters in the polar regions. And so we've actually discovered ice in a lot of these craters, even though sometimes on the bright side the temperatures are in hundreds of degrees. But since there's no atmosphere to transfer this heat, it kind of never melts. It stays super cold in those darker craters. And so what exactly did the scientists discover when looking at this object here? Well, turns out that when they looked at the hotter side, the temperature here was close to about 1000 degrees Kelvin. Pretty hot. It's basically around 720 degrees Celsius or about 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. But on the dark side, they realized the temperature was as close to absolute zero as it gets. In other words, it was ridiculously cold, as if no heat transfer happened whatsoever. Which of course means two things. One is that this planet is definitely tidally locked, and one side is always facing toward the star. But the second thing is that it has like zero atmosphere. There's not even a remotely thin atmosphere similar to Mars. And because this object is somewhat similar in size to Earth, it's about 30% larger than Earth, and in terms of mass, it's possibly a little bit more massive. Here it says it's about 1.7 masses of Earth. It's basically what's known as a super Earth, and we're very excited to have these objects in a nearby galaxy, but around an M-type star, it's very likely that a lot of these objects will have no atmosphere whatsoever, which is actually kind of bad news. Now, we can't really assume that this applies to all of the M-type stars, because first of all, this object is really close to its parent star. It's already very hot, and this is something we've predicted a long time ago. But at the same time, we still need to do more of these observations, and we need to look at other similar objects to discover if they also might not have any atmosphere. But because
Hello guys, and welcome back to another installment of Trey the Explainer. Hey, let's randomly talk about James Cameron's Avatar, for science. I, for no particular reason, rewatched the 2012 science fiction movie recently, and thought it would be neat to examine what, in my opinion, was the strongest part of the film. Not its acting, not its plot or story, but the creature designs of the aliens of the fictitious planet, or should I say moon, Pandora, in which the film is set. As a person fascinated with biology, zoology, paleontology, and evolution, I found Pandora's life forms absolutely fascinating, and no doubt I felt this way because many of the designs were created by my man, science fiction illustrator Wayne Douglas Barlow, whose amazing work I am well acquainted with, particularly his creation of the speculative field guide for the biology of the fictitious world Darwin 4, The Expedition, which was later adapted into Discovery Channel's Alien Planet, and watched habitually every day by childhood me. Anyhow, I decided to take the time to analyze some of the creatures of Pandora in the same way I did with the races of Game of Thrones, not too long ago, by looking at the information given in the film as an evolutionary biologist would, if these aliens were actually real, and making scientific speculations and models based off of this info, as merely a thought experiment. Yes, I'm doing this under the assumption that evolution exists on Pandora. I know I should expect some Navi young Earth creationists protesting my findings, but please remember, this is just for fun. I will mainly be using images from the film, but also promotional material to draw my conclusions. I know some of this stuff might already be covered in external material like books and stuff, but right now, I'm going in otherwise blind, limited to what is shown in the film of Pandora's zoology. We will be tackling mainly the megafauna of Pandora, animals that appear in the film that are relatively large to observe and analyze. Alright, let's get to it, Space Marine scientists. Pandora. Before we talk about the creatures of Pandora, we should briefly talk about the moon itself. Pandora is one of the fictional gas giant Polyphemus's moons. It is roughly the size of Earth, though slightly smaller, and the planet it orbits a single star seemingly very similar to our own Sun. Due to the presence of surface liquid water on the Moon, Pandora likely exists in the Goldilocks zone. And as a result of this, Pandoran life has evolved very similar to Earth's in the sense that it likely originated in its several large oceans and migrated onto land gradually. Plants, or analogous photosynthetic organisms, exist in wide amounts on Pandora, forming massive jungles, grasslands, and so on. Curiously, they are green in pigment, which further suggests that Pandora's star and atmosphere is very close to our own planetary conditions. Keep in mind, if we were to discover plant-like photosynthetic organisms on other planets, likely they will not always be green in pigment. Plants on Earth are only this green color due to it being the most efficient pigment to absorb the wavelengths of the sun's light that reaches the Earth's surface, typically strongest in the red and blue visible wavelengths. Plants on other planets might be red or blue or infrared in color depending on the stars they get their energy from. The life on Pandora has evolved in addition to plant-like organisms, terrestrial, quote-unquote, animals. I use animals as an analogy because the word animal should really only apply to the multicellular kind of Earth, as these would be wholly unrelated. The animals of Pandora seem to have independently convergently evolved into complex ecological niches, analogous to those that have evolved on our planet, with grazing herbivores, scavengers, apex predators, and even domesticated animals by the looks of it. For this reason, multicellular life on Pandora seems old, at the very least a few 100 million years, with a lot of time to evolve organs for specialized tasks, and then reduce them to vestigial remnants or use them for different functions. We'll talk about this later. It is interesting to note that due to Pandora's smaller size and lower gravity, these animals are able to grow taller and larger than animals of Earth, resulting in Pandora's creatures commonly attaining mega sizes. Now, in the film we see that there are more or less 12 different large animal species that make up the ecosystem of the specific jungle habitat, that is the setting. These go as follows: the rhino-like hammerhead titanothere, the pterosaur-like banshee, its whale-sized cousin the great Leonopteryx, the smaller bat-like stingbats, the primate-like Prolemurus, coyote-like viper wolves, the lion-like giant predator Thanator, equid-like dire horse, fan lizard, antelope-like hexapede, buffalo-like sturmbeast, and the sexy blue cat people themselves, the Na'vi. Hexapods. Looking at the creatures of Pandora, it appears that all the large terrestrial animals of this planet are closely related and descend from a shared common ancestor without even making this assumption from the get-go. We can infer this from the body plan of Pandora's megafauna, as all of them with a few scant exceptions possess many of the same physical and morphological traits. Bilateral symmetry, a mouth and head towards the front with an anus and the back towards a tail end, a backbone and internal skeleton of some kind, 6 muscular limbs with digits at their ends, 2 pairs of eyes located on a defined head, a single mouth with teeth, 2 antennae that protrude from the head, and curious nostril-like openings at the base of the neck for respiration or breathing, called, in universe, operculum. Interestingly, unlike the Earth tetrapods, these Pandoran animals have a respiratory system evolved separately from the digestive system, as opposed to a rather inefficient and dangerous setup where the two are intertwined. I couldn't get much confirmation on the digits in these animals on their hands. The banshees seemingly have 5 digits, while the Na'vi have 4, the viper wolves have 4, and so on. This description fits the majority of Pandoran animals, and it appears that the common ancestor to all these species looked a bit like this: a 6-legged creature with 4 eyes, operculum, a mouth, 2 antennae, and a tail. From this speculative ancestor, the animal species found in modern Pandora evolved and diverged from, modifying and specializing organs and body parts for roles best suited to their ecological niches, just like what happened to our ancestors the tetrapods on Earth. Digits became wings and claws, mouths and teeth evolved to eat meat or plants, and body proportions were scaled up and down to best fit a task. I dubbed this superclass of related species on Pandora Hexapoda, or the hexapods, which simply translates to 6-legged. Now, I'm going to break down these species in separate sections and speculate how these species might have diverged from one another over time, then revisit them to create an overall evolutionary family tree of life for Pandora. Carnivores and herbivores. It seems Pandoran hexapoda can be first split into 2 distinct main groups that diverge from one another early on in development. These are hexapods that evolved to be carnivorous and those that evolved to be herbivorous. Carnivores, like the viper wolf, thanator, banshee, etc. seem to be more closely related to one another morphologically than herbivores like dire horses, hammerheads, sturm beasts, hexapods, and so on. One group evolving to eat plant material and nectar, while the other group specialized to consume this class of plant eaters. This split is again rather similar to what happened more or less in mammals on Earth. Both the herbivores and the carnivores that hunt them on Pandora have convergently evolved remarkably with mammals, hunters evolving claws, teeth, and a lean build for chasing and killing, while the plant eaters evolved strong muscular legs for outwitting their predators, armor plating, living in herds, and even defensive head structures. Titania is the scientific name I'll give the herbivore group of Pandora due to their large size and after James Cameron's Titanic. Based on physiology, I would suggest the sturm beasts and the hammerheads are closely related to one another than either are to the dire horses. Both sturm beasts and hammerheads have distinctive head crest structures that probably serve both as defense and sexual display. This is, I think, further clarified by the fact that both sturm beasts and hammerheads have at least 3 visible toe digits, while the dire horse has possibly only 2 in their hoof-like feet. It appears that just like the horses of Earth, dire horses descend from an ancestor with multiple digits, but subsequently lost these digits, while its closer relatives retain the original toe numbers. The placement of the hexapods on this tree is unclear due to our limited information of this creature. Looking at the toe digits might allow us to tentatively place it on the tree. Xeno, Pterosauria, and Phylocanid. On the other carnivorous side of the tree, I suggest the carnivores can be broken up into 2, possibly 3, we'll get to that later, main groups. Xeno, Pterosauria, which means alien pterosaur, and the Phylocanids, an amalgamation of the scientific names of cats and dogs. These 2 groups are best separated by the fact that although they are both predators, Xenopterosauria has evolved wings, while Phylocanid has remained completely terrestrial. I speculate that Xenopterosauria consists of banshees, stingbats, and the great Leonopteryx, while Phylocanid consists of thanators and viper wolves. Let's break these 2 groups down further. Phylocanidae. The thanator and viper wolf appear to be close relatives on account of their very similar body shapes, physical traits, and niches. The thanator has filled a role in the ecosystem akin to the earth lion or tiger, appearing to be mostly solitary, while the viper wolf has filled the role akin to a hyena or coyote or jackal, scavenging and hunting in large cooperative packs to take down prey. A curious thing of note is the fact that the thanator appears to have only a single pair of eyes, as opposed to the typical 4 eyes of most creatures of Pandora. If you look closely, the viper wolf still has a second pair of eyes, like most animals of Pandora, but this pair has been reduced in size, illustrating a possible transitional form between the more basal 4-eyed hexapods and the only 2-eyed thanators. This seems to suggest that the thanator and viper wolf descend from a common ancestor with 4 eyes, but have started to, and in the case of the thanator, fully lost this pair. The reasons for this exactly are unclear. Xenopterosauria is perhaps the most fascinating and interesting of Pandoran life, due to several strange quirks. Banshees, great Leonopteryxes, and stingbats are all superficially similar, and no doubt closer related to one another than to the other animals of Pandora. But if we look closer, they throw us some curveballs. These carnivores fly on 4 large membranous wings, derived from 4 of their ancestors' 6 limbs. The 4 limbs evolved into a pair of massive primary wings, while the second, or perhaps third, evolved into a pair of smaller wings. The last, 3rd pair of limbs remained as talons and feet. This is visible in stingbats and great Leonopteryxes. However, we run into a bit of a problem when we take a deeper look. The makeup of the 4 wings differs between banshees and Leonopteryxes and those of stingbats. Banshees and Leonopteryxes have a forelimb made up of something I will dub a finger fin wing, a very, very unique wing structure made up of several elongated, unconnected digits, while the stingbats seemingly have a more traditional membranous wing closer to the pterosaurs of Earth, where the digits are not part of the wing. This has the possibility to mean many things. Did the wing evolve 2 times independently in these animals, or is the finger fin wing structure an improvement built upon the pre-existing one of the stingbats? I suggest the latter is probably true, with the finger-finned winged banshees and Leonopteryxes being closely related to one another, and the stingbats retaining the relic ancestral wing structure. The finger-finned wings of this clade are very, very unique, as wings in these animals evolve seemingly completely backwards when compared to Earth. Membranous wings on Earth in bats, pterosaurs, other mammals, frogs, etc. evolved from a single plane of webbing between digits, or other structures that grew more and more pronounced over the generations until the webbing became an entire wing. On Pandora, however, Though it appears wings might have initially evolved in this way, this design was improved upon so that the digits themselves individually evolved into long and flat separate digits, fins, that form a complete wing by overlapping with one another. Something that, as far as I know, has never been seen on Earth. Perhaps the closest we have gotten is the feather wings of dinosaurs. One very strange thing to observe is that the banshees only have 4 limbs, primary and secondary wings, unlike all Pandoran life with the exception of the Na'vi. It appears the banshees have lost one pair of their limbs, similar to the whales of Earth losing their hind limbs. Both the great Leonopteryx and the stingbecks have retained this third pair of non-flight limbs as talons, implying that the trait in banshees is a derived structure rather than an ancestral one. I bet, if we were to look closer at a banshee internally, we might find the vestigial remnants of this third pair of limbs, just as we can find them in whales today. This would further vindicate this hypothesis. Fan lizards. It is unclear where the relatively small reptilian hexapods called the fan lizards fit into this tree. They still have the 6 limbs typical of hexapods, but have evolved a crazy back structure that functions like a helicopter for flight, and to confuse predators. We have very little information on these animals. We don't know if they are carnivorous or herbivorous, so they could exist pretty much anywhere on our speculative hexapod tree, from near the beginning, to on the carnivore side, to even on the herbivorous side. We just don't know. The crazy mess that is the Na'vi. Alright, now on to those dreaded cat people. The Na'vi are perhaps the hardest to fit into our tree in the overall biology of Pandora in general. Unlike all other animals, they have 4 limbs, only 2 eyes, no operculum, no antennae, and so much else non-typical Pandoran life. They are more or less tall, lanky humans with cat ears, eyes, and tails, seemingly tacked on like a Halloween costume. They are so atypical of Pandora and typical of Earth that some have suggested that they aren't even native to Pandora or related to its species, being an alien race that has regressed after landing on this alien planet. Though an interesting theory, I find this unsatisfactory. Obviously, James Cameron and the many other people behind Avatar didn't want the race of creatures we, as the audience, are supposed to relate to and sympathize with the most to look like gross squids or bats or crows or insects like actual aliens would likely look to us, especially if one of these human characters were supposed to have a romance with it. So, they designed them to look more or less identical to humans of Earth, and appealing to our primate beauty standards, which is likely unlikely for any aliens to evolve in such a manner. Yes, convergent evolution exists and is visible on Pandora, but convergent evolution can only account for so much. The Na'vi, if they are closely related to Pandora's other megafauna, should have the same distinctive 4 eyes, and 6 limbs, and collar, nostrils, and so on. But we don't. They are tetrapods with 4 limbs, 2 eyes, and nostrils above their mouths, as well as breasts exactly where humans have ours. I'm sorry, it's incredibly borderline impossible that independent evolution between 2 planets would result in bodies that are so darn close. My personal opinion is that the story would have been more interesting if the Na'vi looked far more alien and animal to us, as they should or would in reality. But that would be implying a weird bestiality tone to the film that some people might want to avoid. Digression aside, based on their morphology alone, the Na'vi appear to be either completely unrelated or only very distantly related to most other Pandoran life, or are related but are an incredibly diverged branch of the hexapod lineage that has evolved to lack many of the quintessential traits typical of Pandoran's hexapods. And there is some evidence for the latter theory. It seems that the Na'vi are closely related to the tree-dwelling Prolemurus. The 6-limbed primate-like Prolemurus could represent a transitional form between the traditional hexapods of Pandora and the very unique tetrapodal body plan of the Na'vi, as the lemurs appear to lack operculum and only have 2 eyes. And this is fitting with the parallel evolution of the Na'vi and humans, both evolving from tree-dwelling primate-like creatures. But if this is the case, what happened to the 3rd pair of limbs in the Na'vi? Maybe, like whales and the tailbones of humans, they have been retained internally as vestigial remnants, like I speculated for the banshees. If this isn't the case, though, I suggest 2 main models of Na'vi evolution to explain this quirk. Number 1, that somewhere along the line a genetic quirk deleted a part of the Na'vi's body structure. And number 2, possibly that 4 of the Na'vi's limbs fused into a single limb. Theory 1, gene malfunction. We don't know how Pandoran genetics work, or how these creatures develop in the embryonic stage, but it seems likely that these animals probably have a sequence in their genetic code that maps out where organs are placed in their body. In Earth animals, these genes are called Hox genes, and they are essentially instructions on where to put things during organismal development. They tell the body to put the legs here, or the eyes here, or the anus in the back. Mess with these genes, and they could severely alter the placement of organs on the organism. For instance, there's a ton of horror stories about scientists altering the Hox genes of fruit flies, causing legs to grow where their antennae typically belong, or eyes to form on the kneecaps, or a second thorax and pair of wings. Hope you sleep well tonight knowing this could probably be done on a human if we wanted to. Now, alterations to Hox genes occur very, very rarely in nature, because it can be very dangerous and overwhelmingly unhelpful to the organism. But it might have happened at the very least once. More on that in a second. Theory number 1 speculates that perhaps through some gene malfunction, likely in something analogous to Hox genes, a part of the body was deleted, and simply did not in the embryonic stage of the Na'vi, resulting in the missing pair of limbs. Unlikely as this may seem, weirder things have happened in evolution on Earth. Tardigrades, those strange little water bears, appear to have undergone a rather curious evolutionary path. They are close relatives to arthropods like crustaceans and insects, and on the outside you can see it kind of. However, when geneticists looked at the Hox genes that created the layout of an organism's body, they found something strange in water bears. The tardigrades are effectively missing a part of their ancestor's body. It turns out that the Hox genes that code for a region that responds to the entire thorax and most of the abdomen of insects, got deleted in their DNA along the way, resulting in their stumpy, compact body plan. As a result of this, nearly the entire body of tardigrades is effectively just the head region and its insect relatives. Yes, water bears are pretty much heads with legs. Perhaps something happened to the Na'vi with the deletion of limb Hox genes, or a Hox genes for an entire section of the body. And like the water bears, part of their ancestor's body was, quote-unquote, deleted. Theory number 2, limb fusing. My second theory is that the fore and middle limbs seen in the Prolemurus fused into one in the Na'vi. The fusing of several separate limbs together does not seem to have occurred on Earth except as a birth defect called cyrenomyelia, or mermaid syndrome, which is almost always non-advantageous to those it occurs in. So just like the Hox gene alteration deletion, this is rare to persist naturally in the animal kingdom, but it could and be favored by natural selection if such a thing is advantageous in an environment. The reason I bring up this theory as a possibility is mainly because the illustrator who designed the Na'vi has played with the idea before. Wayne Douglas Barlow, in his The Expedition back in 1990, a book filled with speculative alien creatures living on a planet called Darwin 4, probably a major factor in James Cameron deciding to hire Barlow for the film, gave an alien design called the Gyro Sprinter, where a quadrupedal animal with 4 limbs initially evolved in a way that caused the front and back pairs of limbs to fuse together into only 2. Perhaps something similar happened to the Na'vi, where the 2 limbs were fused together in a similar manner. I know using this external information is kind of cheating, but it suggests that such a thing is possible in the universe Barlow created. To determine which theory, if either, are correct, we will have to examine the Na'vi's anatomy internally and genetically to better understand this, to see if we find fused bones or abnormal muscles or vestigial limbs or so on. Regardless if these 2 theories or unknown ones are behind the Na'vi's loss of limbs, I suggest the Na'vi possibly originated from the drier savanna land in Pandora and convergently evolved very similar to humans as a result of this, only to migrate into the jungle regions over time. This speculative xenoprimate branch consists of Prolemurus and the Na'vi, likely splitting off very early on in Hexapoda, before the Titania and Carnivore split, losing their second pair of eyes in operculum over time. Conclusion. So after all that, based on my research and speculations, my Pandoran evolutionary tree should look something like this. It's probably wrong, somewhere if not entirely, and keep in mind all of this was a neat little thought experiment to test my evolutionary biology skills. I bet you could create many, many alternative theoretical trees. To truly test this hypothesis, we should further study the internal morphology of these creatures, bones, skeletons, muscles, organs, etc., as
What makes a man? Is it his wealth? His looks? The love of his friends and family? Wrong. All those are wrong. There is only one thing that truly defines a man.
Unit ready.
I use alternate history in my videos to discuss real-world questions. Makes us think about how we got to where we are today. Perspective on how events shape who we are as people, nations, cultures. This isn't one of those videos. We're going to talk about another part of alternate history. The part where giant Japanese samurai mechs invade Berlin, where Hitler is killed by a handshake, where cutscenes look like they were filmed for an 80s porno. When I was 10, I didn't care, it all blew my freaking mind. Command and Conquer. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. I don't blame you for not knowing. CNC hasn't been that relevant this decade, since EA drove the franchise into an early grave like it was gonna talk.
Strategy game. Economy will be the focus. We have a harvester to start things off. Nothing too crazy yet.
Nothing too crazy.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
I want to enlighten you on a blessed series that placed the seed of that alternate history craziness into my young, impressionable mind. The Red Alert series. Is it realistic? No. Does it have to be? Of course not. This isn't really a video about lore, since there really isn't a lot of it. Or maybe I just want to talk about it. It's my channel, who cares? Most people agree World War II wasn't the best time. And in a post-war 1946, in the middle of the desert, the man himself, Albert Einstein, wanted to live in a world where such a tragedy never occurred. And so he came up with an idea, a machine to travel through time. And he built that machine to travel back in time to undo the future that is a coup. Or, Hitler. He goes back in time and kills Hitler before he can mess everything up. But Cody, if he went back in time to kill Hitler and everything changed, then why would he ever need to go back if he came from a present that never heard of Hitler? It's a strategy game from the 90s. Don't think about it. Because Hitler now never came to power, instead of Nazi Germany waging war against everyone, causing World War II, the Soviet Union decides to invade all of Europe. Each Command & Conquer game has multiple endings because you can play as both sides, and since there's multiple games, well, some endings just aren't going to be canon. If you play as the Soviets, then hot dog congrats, baby. You get to lead the invasion of Europe, country by country, using your strangely advanced technology like iron curtains and Tesla coils, as you slowly make your way to